He used to look at me like I was everything he ever wanted. In the beginning, Corvin's voice was soft, his touch gentle, and his promises felt real. I believed every word. I believed in us. Our home felt warm, full of quiet dreams about the future we were going to build together. I never imagined that the same man would one day make me feel like I was nothing. The change didn't happen all at once. It came slowly, like a shadow growing longer each day. After years of trying to have a child, the silence in our home started to feel heavy. At first we both carried that weight together, but somewhere along the way he stopped seeing it as our problem. It became mine. There were moments I still remember clearly, sitting in a quiet room after another appointment, hoping for good news but leaving with the same emptiness. I would look at him searching for comfort, but his eyes had already begun to drift away. He would say things like maybe it just wasn't meant to be, but his tone felt distant, almost cold. I started noticing the small things, the way he avoided conversations, the way he stayed out longer than usual, the way his patience with me began to disappear. Every silence between us felt louder than words. I tried to hold on to fix what I thought was breaking, but I didn't even realize that I was the only one trying. Then came the words that stayed with me, not loud, not shouted, but sharp enough to cut deep. He would make small comments that sounded like jokes, but they weren't. Each one made me feel smaller, weaker, like I was failing at something I couldn't control. I began to question myself. I began to believe him. I stopped sharing my feelings. I stopped reaching out. It felt like no matter what I said, it wouldn't matter. The distance between us grew wider, and I found myself standing alone in a life that was supposed to be ours. Even when we were in the same room, it felt like we were worlds apart. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had done wrong. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to find the moment where things started to fall apart, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix something that was already slipping out of my hands. What hurt the most wasn't just the silence or the distance, it was the feeling of being slowly erased, like I was no longer the woman he once loved, but a reminder of something he didn't want anymore. And still I stayed, not because I was weak, but because I believed things could change. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that the quiet pain I was feeling would soon turn into something much deeper, something that would change everything I thought I knew about him and about myself. At first he still tried to act like everything was normal. He would ask how my day was, sit across from me at dinner and pretend we were still the same couple we used to be, but something in his voice had changed. It no longer carried warmth. It felt forced, like he was playing a role he didn't believe in anymore. The support he once gave me started to fade. When we had appointments, he began making excuses not to come. Work was suddenly more important. Meetings ran late, calls couldn't be missed. I would sit alone in waiting rooms surrounded by couples holding hands while I stared at my phone, hoping he would show up at the last minute. He never did. When I told him how that made me feel, he would sigh like I was asking for too much. He would say things like, I can't put my whole life on hold, or you're overthinking everything. His words made me feel like my pain was an inconvenience to him, something he didn't want to deal with anymore. Then the comments started, quiet at first, almost hidden behind a smile. He would look around our home and say it felt too empty, or he would mention how other people were moving forward in their lives while we were stuck. Each sentence felt small on its own, but together they built something heavy inside. Maya's mother began visiting more often. She would walk through the house, touching things, observing everything with sharp eyes. Her words were polite, but they carried judgment. She would talk about family legacy, about the importance of children, about how some women are simply blessed and others are not. Every time she spoke, it felt like she was pointing directly at me without saying my name. Corvin never defended me. He would just sit there quiet, sometimes even agreeing with her. That silence hurt more than anything she said. It felt like he had already chosen a side, and I wasn't on it. I started noticing how differently he treated me. The kindness was gone, the patience was gone, even the way he looked at me had changed. There was no softness left, only disappointment, like I had become a problem he didn't know how to solve. I tried harder. I cooked his favorite meals, kept the house perfect, did everything I could to bring back what we had. I thought if I just showed him enough love, enough effort, things would go back to how they used to be, but no matter what I did, it never felt like enough. Slowly, I began to feel invisible, like I was living beside him, not with him. Conversations became shorter, colder. Some days we barely spoke at all. The silence between us wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying, and deep down I started to feel something I didn't want to admit. It wasn't just sadness anymore, it was fear that the man I once trusted completely was turning into someone I didn't recognize, someone who was slowly pushing me out of his life piece by piece. I didn't know how far he would go, I didn't know how much worse things would become, but I could feel it, something was coming. And it wasn't going to be gentle. The distance between us didn't just grow, it settled into every part of our lives. What used to feel like a home now felt cold and unfamiliar. We moved around each other like strangers, careful, distant, avoiding anything that might turn into a real conversation. Corvin started coming home later than usual. At first he would send short messages saying he had work to finish, then even those messages became rare. I would sit in the living room waiting without realizing I was waiting, listening for the sound of the door. Some nights I fell asleep on the couch only to wake up in the middle of the night and find the house still quiet. When he was home he kept his distance. He stayed on his phone, answered questions with one-word replies, and avoided eye contact. It felt like there was an invisible wall between us, one I couldn't break. No matter how hard I tried, every conversation somehow turned back to the same thing. It didn't matter what we started talking about, it always ended with blame. Not loud, not explosive, but steady and sharp. He would remind me again and again of what we didn't have, of what I couldn't give him. I began to carry that blame with me everywhere. It followed me through the house, sat with me at the table, stayed with me even when I was alone. I started to believe that maybe he was right, maybe I was the reason everything was falling apart. I stopped calling my friends, I avoided family gatherings. I didn't want to answer questions or see the looks in people's eyes. It was easier to stay quiet, to stay hidden. The world outside felt too heavy to face, and the world inside my home felt like it was closing in on me. Even simple things became difficult. Getting out of bed took effort. Smiling felt unnatural. I would look at myself in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. The confidence I once had was gone, replaced by doubt and exhaustion. Corvin didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did and just didn't care. There was no concern in his voice, no attempt to understand what I was going through. It felt like he had already decided who I was, and nothing I did could change his mind. One evening I tried to talk to him again. I told him how I felt, how everything between us was slipping away. For a moment I thought I saw something in his eyes, something close to guilt, but it disappeared just as quickly. He turned away and said he was tired, that he didn't want to have the same conversation again. That was the moment something shifted inside me, not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply. I realized I was losing myself while trying to hold on to someone who had already let go. The silence that followed that night was different. It wasn't filled with hope anymore, it was heavy with truth, a truth I wasn't ready to fully face yet, but I could feel it growing stronger, and somewhere deep inside a question began to form, quiet but impossible to ignore. What if I was never the problem? The moment everything truly changed came on a night that was supposed to be normal. Corvin told me we were going to a family gathering. I didn't want to go, but refusing would only lead to another argument, so I agreed. The house was full when we arrived. Voices, laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. It all felt too loud, too forced. I stayed close to the corner, trying to avoid attention, but I could already feel the weight of people's eyes on me. It wasn't direct, but it was there, hidden behind polite smiles and quiet whispers. For a while I managed to stay unnoticed. I kept my head down, answering simple questions, pretending everything was fine. Corvin, on the other hand, seemed different that night. He was louder, more confident, like he had something to prove. At one point everyone gathered around the dining area. Conversations overlapped, stories were shared, and then somehow the topic shifted. It always did. Family, children, the future. I felt my chest tighten. Corvin laughed lightly, like it was just another casual moment. Then he said something that made the entire room go quiet for a second. He joked about how some people spend years waiting for a family that never comes. His words were smooth, but the meaning behind them was clear. A few people chuckled awkwardly, others looked away. I stood there frozen. Then he continued. This time it wasn't even hidden behind humor. He talked about wasted time, about expectations that were never met. He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. I felt every eye in the room turned toward me. No one spoke, no one defended me. Even his mother sat there silent with a look that almost felt like agreement. The air felt heavy, like I couldn't breathe properly. My hands started to shake, but I forced myself to stay still. I looked at Corvin, hoping just for a second that he would stop, that he would realize what he was doing, but he didn't. There was no regret in his face, no hesitation, just cold certainty. In that moment something inside me broke, not in a way that made me cry or collapse. It broke in silence, deep and quiet, like a part of me simply gave up trying to hold everything together. I didn't say anything, I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I just stood there, and then I walked away. No one followed me, no one called my name. It was like I had disappeared the moment I stepped out of that room. When I got home the silence felt different. It wasn't painful anymore, it was empty, but in a way that gave me space to think. I sat alone for a long time, replaying everything in my mind, the words, the looks, the silence, and for the first time I didn't feel ashamed. I felt something else, clarity. I realized that what happened that night wasn't just humiliation, it was the truth being revealed, not about me, but about him, about who he had become. The pain was still there, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. It was changing into something stronger, something steady. That was the night I stopped blaming myself, and even though I didn't know it yet, that moment was the beginning of everything that would come next. The days after that night were quiet, but not in the same way as before. The silence no longer felt heavy with confusion. It felt clear, almost sharp, like I was finally seeing things without emotion clouding my judgment. I started going through old papers, not with any real purpose at first, just trying to organize things to keep my mind busy. Bills, documents, reports, pieces of a life that once felt stable. I didn't expect to find anything important, but then I noticed something missing: Corvin's medical reports. I remembered all the appointments we had talked about, all the tests that were supposedly done. I had shared everything openly, every result, every detail, but when it came to him, I realized I had never actually seen anything official. He always had an explanation, always said things were fine, and I had trusted him without question. That thought stayed with me. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, but the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Why would he hide something so simple? Why would he avoid showing me results if there was nothing wrong? The question kept growing until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning I contacted the clinic. My hands felt cold as I made the call. I didn't even know what I was expecting to hear. Part of me was scared that I was overthinking everything. Another part of me felt like I was finally getting closer to something real. After being transferred a few times, I finally spoke to someone who could help. They asked for details, confirmed identities, and then there was a pause, a long one. That silence made my heart race. When the voice returned, it was careful, almost hesitant. They told me that Corvin had completed his tests a long time ago, years ago. Actually, the results had already been finalized and discussed. I felt my breath catch. I asked the question slowly, like I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. What did the results say? There was another pause, then the truth came out, simple and direct. He was infertile. For a moment everything around me felt still, not loud, not dramatic, just completely still, like time had stopped long enough for me to understand what those words meant. All those years, all the blame, all the silent guilt I carried, none of it was mine. He knew, he had always known. The realization didn't hit me with anger at first. It came as something colder, something deeper, a quiet understanding that everything I had believed was built on a lie. Every comment he made, every look, every moment he made me feel less than. It was never about me. I sat there holding on to that truth, letting it settle inside me. The pain I once felt started to shift again, changing into something stronger, something steady and controlled. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't confused, I wasn't doubting myself. I knew exactly what had been done to me, and more importantly, I knew what I was going to do next. I didn't confront him right away. That was the first decision I made after learning the truth, not because I was afraid, but because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Reacting too quickly would only give him control again. For years he had shaped the story, twisted it, and made me believe it. I wasn't going to let him do that anymore, so I stayed quiet. I watched him the same way he had once watched me, carefully, patiently, and the more I paid attention, the more I began to notice things I had ignored before. The late nights weren't just about work, the distance wasn't just emotional, there was something else. One evening he came home later than usual. He seemed distracted, almost uneasy, but not in a way that showed guilt. It was more like someone trying to keep up a lie without slipping. He barely looked at me, just walked past and went straight to the other room. That's when I realized wasn't just pulling away from me, he was moving towards someone else. I didn't ask him, I didn't argue, I didn't even react. Instead, I let things play out. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern became clearer. He was texting more, stepping outside to take calls, guarding his phone in a way he never had before. And then I saw her name for the first time, Maris. It was just a quick glance, nothing obvious, but it was enough. After everything I had learned, it didn't surprise me the way it should have. It only confirmed what I already felt, had already replaced me in his mind. What struck me wasn't just the betrayal, it was the reason behind it. He truly believed that starting over with someone else would fix everything, that he could escape the truth simply by choosing a different person, that he could build the life he wanted as long as no one knew the reality. But I knew, and that changed everything. Instead of breaking down, I became calm, collected. For the first time, I wasn't reacting emotionally, I was thinking clearly. I started putting things together piece by piece, the records, the timeline, his behavior, the lies. I wasn't doing this out of anger, I was doing it because I deserved the truth to be seen. Every day I grew more certain I didn't need to raise my voice or create a scene. I didn't need to beg for explanations or demand apologies. None of that would matter. What mattered was timing. What mattered was making sure that when the truth came out, there would be no way for him to hide from it. So I let him continue. I let him believe I was still the same person, quiet, unaware, broken. I let him think he was in control of everything, that his version of reality was still intact, but inside something had changed completely. I wasn't the woman he had been blaming all those years. I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one holding the truth, and I was just waiting for the right moment to reveal It not long after that he finally said it. There was no build-up, no hesitation. Just one evening he walked into the room, stood across from me, and spoke like he had already decided everything. He said he wanted a divorce. His voice was calm, almost relieved, like he had been waiting for this moment. He didn't look angry or guilty. If anything, he looked certain, like he was finally moving forward with the life he believed he deserved. I didn't react the way he expected. I didn't ask why. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just listened. He went on to explain, but his words felt empty. He talked about needing a future, about wanting more from life, about how things between us had already ended long ago, and then, without saying it directly, he made it clear there was someone else. Maris. He didn't say her name with shame. He said it like it justified everything, like finding someone new erased all the years we had shared, all the pain he had caused. For a moment I studied his face. I tried to find even a small trace of the man I once knew, but he was gone. In his place stood someone who truly believed his own lies, and still I stayed calm. I simply nodded. That seemed to surprise him more than anything. I could see it in his eyes. He expected resistance. He expected emotion, but I gave him nothing. That silence made him more confident. Within days, everything moved quickly. Papers were prepared, conversations were brief, and decisions were made without much discussion. His family supported him completely. To them, this was a necessary step, something that should have happened a long time ago. I heard the whispers again, that I couldn't give him what he needed, that he deserved better, that this was for the best. This time those words didn't touch me the same way, because I knew the truth. I signed the papers without hesitation. My hand didn't shake, my heart didn't race. It felt strangely peaceful, like I was finally stepping out of something that had been holding me down for far too long. He watched me as I signed, almost confused. Maybe he thought I would break at the last moment. Maybe he thought I would beg him to stay, but I didn't. I handed the papers back to him, looked at him one last time, and said nothing. That silence followed me as I walked away. To him, it probably looked like defeat. To his family, it probably confirmed everything they believed about me, but in reality it was something else entirely. It was control. For the first time I wasn't reacting to what he was doing. I was letting him walk exactly where he wanted to go without stopping him, because I knew something he didn't. I knew where that path would lead, and I knew that very soon everything he believed, every lie he built his confidence on, was going to fall apart. All I had to do was wait a little longer. A few months passed and everything unfolded exactly as I expected. Word spread quickly that Corvin had moved on. People talked about how fast he rebuilt his life, how he seemed happier, more alive. Soon invitations started going out for his engagement celebration, a new beginning. They called it a fresh start. I received one too. I stared at it for a long time, my name written neatly, like nothing had ever happened, like I was just another guest invited to witness his happiness. I almost didn't go, but then I remembered everything, every word, every look, every moment. He made me feel small, and more than that, I remembered the truth I was holding. So I decided to go. The night of the event, the place was filled with people, laughter, music, conversations. It all felt familiar, like the same kind of gathering where I had once stood silent and humiliated, but this time I felt different. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't afraid, I was calm. Corvin stood at the center of it all, smiling, confident, greeting guests like nothing in his past could touch him. Beside him was Maris, dressed beautifully, holding on to him like she believed every promise he had made. For a moment I simply observed, no anger, no sadness, just clarity. When the room settled and attention shifted toward them, I stepped forward. At first no one noticed me, then slowly a few heads turned, conversations softened, the energy in the room began to change. Corvin saw me. I watched his expression shift, just slightly surprised, maybe a hint of discomfort, but it quickly faded. He straightened, trying to hold on to his confidence. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't create a scene, I spoke clearly. I said that before he started this new life, there was something everyone deserved to know, something that had been hidden for years. The room grew quiet. I could feel every eye on me, just like before, but this time it felt different. This time I wasn't the one being judged. I took out the documents I had kept safe, the ones he never thought I would see, the ones that held the truth he had buried for so long. I didn't need to say much, just enough. I revealed that the problem was never me, that the reason we couldn't have children had nothing to do with my body, my worth, or anything. He had made people believe it was him. For a second no one reacted, then the silence broke, not with noise but with realization. Faces changed, whispers started. The confidence on Corvin's face disappeared, replaced by something I had never seen before, fear. Maris looked at him, confused at first, then hurt, then something sharper, betrayal. She stepped back like she was seeing him clearly. For the first time he tried to speak, tried to explain, but the words didn't come out the same way they used to. They didn't carry power anymore, because the truth was already there and there was nothing he could do to take it back. I didn't stay to watch everything fall apart. I didn't need to. I had said what needed to be said, and for the first time in years I walked away with my head high. I didn't look back when I left that night, but I didn't need to see what happened to know everything had changed. The silence I left behind wasn't the same silence I once feared. This time it was filled with truth, and truth has a way of spreading faster than any lie ever could. By the next morning everything had started to unravel for him. People who once stood by his side began to question him. The same voices that used to agree with him now whispered behind his back. The confidence he carried so easily was gone, replaced by doubt and embarrassment. He could no longer control the story the way he always had. Maris didn't stay. I heard about it through others. She had confronted him after I left, demanding answers he couldn't give. The trust she thought they had built disappeared in a moment. To her it wasn't just about the truth I revealed, it was about the years of deception, the way he had blamed someone else to protect himself. She walked away that same night. His family, the ones who once looked at me with quiet judgment, were forced to face something they had ignored for years. The truth didn't just expose him, it exposed their silence, their willingness to believe him without question. Some of them tried to reach out to me, messages, calls, apologies that came too late, words filled with regret but empty of real understanding. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed anything from them. Their acceptance was never mine to earn in the first place. Corvin, on the other hand, tried in his own way. He called more than once. The first time I let it ring. The second time I watched the screen until it stopped. By the third time I already knew what he would say. Excuses, justifications, maybe even an attempt to turn things around again, but none of it mattered anymore. The power he once had over me was gone completely. I didn't feel satisfaction the way I thought I would. There was no excitement in his downfall, no need to celebrate what had happened. What I felt was something quieter, something deeper, relief. For so long I carried a weight that was never mine. I lived with doubt, with guilt, with the constant feeling that I wasn't enough, and now all of that was gone, not because he was exposed, but because I finally saw the truth for myself. His life didn't fall apart because of me, it fell apart because it was built on lies, and once those lies were gone there was nothing left to hold it together. As for me, I didn't rush into anything new. I didn't try to replace what I had lost. Instead, I took my time. I allowed myself to breathe, to exist without pressure, without judgment. For the first time in years I felt like I belonged to myself again, and that feeling, that quiet, steady sense of peace, was worth more than anything I had ever tried to hold on to before. I started to rebuild my life slowly, carefully, one day at a time. I didn't rush into new relationships or try to erase the past. Instead, I focused on myself, my own dreams, my own goals, my own happiness. Every small step felt like reclaiming a piece of the person I had lost along the way. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. Simple things like walking through the park alone, cooking a meal just for myself, or sitting in quiet reflection reminded me that I didn't need someone else to define my worth. I had survived the lies, the betrayal, the years of quiet humiliation, and I was stronger because of it. Corvin's absence became a strange kind of freedom. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The anger I once carried had transformed into clarity. I understood that his cruelty reflected only his own insecurities, not my value as a person. I began to forgive not him, but myself for believing in someone who wasn't honest. Life started to feel lighter. I invested more in friendships that mattered, rekindled passions I had put aside, and discovered new joys in things I had forgotten. I loved each small achievement. Each moment of genuine laughter reminded me that happiness was possible even after heartbreak. I realized revenge wasn't about causing pain, it was about allowing the truth to come to light while keeping my dignity intact. Karma had done its work, and I didn't need to actively destroy him. Exposing the truth and walking away had already been enough. Watching him face the consequences of his own actions without my interference was its own quiet justice. Most importantly, I learned that self-respect is worth more than approval, and peace of mind is far stronger than temporary satisfaction. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I had already proven it to myself. The person I had once been, the one who doubted, blamed herself, and stayed silent, was gone. In her place stood someone resilient, wise, and whole. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Years later, when I think back, I don't feel bitterness. I feel gratitude for the strength I found, for the truth that was revealed, and for the life I reclaimed. Corvin's lies couldn't touch me anymore. They were just echoes of a past I no longer needed to carry. I had been called barren, accused of failure, and blamed for things I had no control over. Yet in the end it wasn't me who lost. I walked away with my life, my dignity, and a future full of possibility, and that I realized was worth more than anything he had ever promised me. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't in confrontation, it's in thriving quietly while the truth speaks for itself. And for the first time I felt completely free. The woman he tried to break had survived, and she was unstoppable. The story ends there, but the lesson stays: never let someone else's lies define your worth. True strength comes from knowing your own truth and living it without fear.